She was still floating when the silence hit. Face down, arms spread, the silver trim of her wetsuit catching the light like tinsel in dark water. A child in the front row had started crying, but no one moved. Neptune circled, once slow, deliberate, then vanished beneath the surface, leaving only a smear of red drifting toward the acrylic wall. Somewhere above, the speakers were still playing music. The wrong song now, too soft, too cheerful. Trainers stood frozen. The emergency siren was delayed by nearly 10 seconds. By then, her body had already gone under again. The last thing anyone remembers is how calm the tank looked, even as it bled, and the way he looked up at the crowd like he didn't recognize any of us. If moments like that make you wonder what went wrong long before the water turned red, stay with us and share the story with someone who still believes they're just animals doing tricks. The day began like any other at Blue Horizon Oceanic Park, nestled along the sun-drenched coastline of San Diego. It was the kind of California morning that made the sea look endless and the salt air feel like renewal. Trainers moved briskly through the narrow halls behind the amphitheater, their sneakers squeaking on damp concrete, the scent of thawing mackerel trailing behind metal carts. Maris Ellington, 27, adjusted the black dive belt on her wetsuit as she passed the large bulletin board that still held last month's safety audit torn at the corner, but untouched. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the stainless steel lockers across the room, calm, focused, but already calculating. She had joined Blue Horizon 2 years ago, quickly earning a reputation for her quiet command of even the most temperamental animals. Her connection with Neptune, the park's main attraction, was what management touted in press releases and donor luncheons. It wasn't just training, it was trust. They claimed a bond. Maris had been raised on the coast of Oregon, her childhood shaped by tide pools and hours spent studying sea lions through the lens of a secondhand camera. She had always wanted the ocean to let her in. And in Neptune, she found a gateway. By late morning, the first show had ended. Families filed out through shaded corridors while vendors reset carts stacked with dolphin keychains and butter-drenched popcorn. The sound system played soft instrumental music, interrupted only by the occasional screech of a cleaning hose on wet cement. Maris stood beside the massive performance tank, clipboard in hand, reviewing cues with 2 junior trainers. Neptune swam slow circles beneath the water, the black of his dorsal fins slicing a lazy path just under the surface. Occasionally, he flicked his tail in a small burst, sending a whisper of ripples across the acrylic viewing glass. "Did you run the routine?" Maris asked, scanning the lineup for the afternoon show. "Twice this morning," one replied. "He was good, just distracted, a bit twitchy at the end." She nodded, lips tightening. "Keep the finale short today. No side breaches." They exchanged glances, but didn't push back. Everyone knew Maris had the final word when it came to Neptune. And Neptune, well, he didn't perform for just anyone. The stadium began to fill again around 2:30 p.m. Tourists wearing sun hats and sandals wandered to their seats under the wide white canopy, shielding their eyes from the glare bouncing off the water. The lighting techs adjusted the spot beams above the tank. Trainers mic-checked from the platform. A pair of teenage girls laughed as they took front row seats in the splash zone, oblivious to the muscle hidden just beneath the turquoise surface. Maris stood still, her eyes on Neptune, as he hovered near the bottom of the pool. The water was clean and clear, but light bent strangely down there, distorting his shape like something half-remembered from a dream. She tapped her fingers once against the laminated cue sheet. He hadn't breached yet today. That wasn't like him, just then. A deep thud echoed from the tank, Neptune's tail striking the far wall with a low, muted boom. A few guests startled. Maris didn't flinch, but her eyes sharpened. He surfaced slowly, nostrils flaring, the water rolling off his back like oil on glass. His eye met hers across the platform longer than it should have. Too long. She stepped back slightly. The smell of fish, rubber, and bleach felt suddenly too thick in her throat. Set for the opener, a voice called from behind her. Maris didn't respond right away. Her gaze was still locked with Neptune's. "Yes," she finally said, folding the cue sheet. But her voice didn't sound as sure as it usually did. The late afternoon sun slanted low across the bleachers, casting long shadows over the faces of the crowd. Inside the glass tank at Blue Horizon Oceanic Park, the water shimmered beneath the stage lights, each ripple reflecting a kaleidoscope of blue, green, and silver. Music swelled from the speakers, cinematic, sweeping, the kind of melody that signaled magic was about to happen. Maris Ellington stood poised at the edge of the platform, the silver trim of her wetsuit catching the light, her silhouette framed against the roiling backdrop of the Pacific sky. She stepped forward and dove in cleanly, slicing into the water just seconds before Neptune surfaced behind her. The Orca's emergence drew gasps from the audience, his sheer size, the gleam of his black and white form, the power in his motion. He circled beneath her like a shadow with mass. Then, on cue, he breached, a massive arc of muscle and water, a full-body twist that sent a wave crashing into the first 3 rows. Children squealed with delight. Parents laughed and wiped their faces. Camera shutters fired like applause. Maris surfaced beside him, grinning. From above, it looked effortless, like a perfect dance between human and animal. She whispered a cue, barely audible even to herself. Neptune pivoted, responding instantly. His trust in her had always been the cornerstone of their performance. That was what made it different from a circus act. At least, that's what she told herself. In the trainer wing earlier that day, she had brushed off a junior colleague who hesitated to review Neptune's pre-show behavior log. He was just overstimulated yesterday, she'd said, tying back her hair. He knows me. We're good. She believed it, deeply. Believed that their relationship was built on mutual understanding, that the months of daily routines, hand signals, eye contact, and reinforcement had created something more than a contract of obedience, something sacred. But the signs were there. 2 days ago, Neptune had failed to respond to her signal to surface a minor deviation. She'd covered it with an improvised spin and exit, chalking it up to distraction. Yesterday, during a private feeding session, he had swiped his tail with enough force to crack a section of the viewing panel. The maintenance team replaced it by dawn. No report was filed. Today, the air around the tank felt different, wetter, warmer, the chlorine thicker than usual. Or maybe it was the stress. The tank lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering once like a skipped heartbeat. They swam together, choreographed movements honed over months. At one point, Neptune dipped beneath her, lifting her gently with his snout in the crowd-favorite surfboard pose. The audience roared from below. Maris could see his eye roll upward, catching her just for a beat. There was no fear in her, only pride. She gave the recall signal, open palm to chest, sweep left. Neptune began to turn, as expected. But then he didn't stop. His massive head coasted too close. His snout grazed her hip firm, too firm, enough to jolt her out of rhythm. The crowd didn't notice, but Maris did. She righted herself mid-water, treading. Her breath hitched. She turned. Neptune was hovering beside her now, close, motionless. His flippers out slightly, dorsal fin cutting a clean triangle above the surface. The water between them stilled. Neptune, she said under her breath. He didn't move, not back, not forward, just watched her, behind her. The music faded into the next cue. Above, the announcer's voice boomed something about the beauty of trust. She gave the recall again. He blinked once, no movement. In that moment, surrounded by applause and colored lights, Maris felt the first ripple of doubt, a tiny fracture in the certainty she had always carried like armor. Then he turned away, slow and smooth, diving deep and disappearing into the darker section of the tank. She floated in place, pulse climbing. Water dripped down the back of her neck inside the wetsuit, cold and sudden. From the stands, nothing seemed amiss. Another seamless performance. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The trainer wing behind the stadium always smelled of thawed fish and wet neoprene. Humid, cramped, and filled with the constant whir of water pumps and radios. It was a place where concerns often drowned beneath routine. After the mid-morning rehearsal, Maris pulled her wetsuit halfway down and rubbed at her shoulder with a towel. Her arms still ached from the last swim. Neptune had been slower to follow cues, heavier in movement, like something in him had shifted out of sync. But she said nothing. Melissa Nguyen, the park's most experienced Orca trainer, blocked her path by the lockers. He over-rotated again, she said, low and firm. Her voice had none of the performative sweetness used on guests. That last breach nearly slammed him into the wall. Maris blinked, caught off guard. He was adjusting to the wind angle. Wind doesn't make his tail flex like that. He was agitated. Did you see how he kept his head low after the dive? Maris didn't answer right away. She looked down at her towel, then back at the hall. A pair of interns passed by with a bucket of sardines, laughing too loudly. She lowered her voice. Melissa, he's fine. He's just got more energy this week. Melissa folded her arms, unconvinced. You ever worked with Tillicum? Maris's gaze snapped to hers, sharp. That's not the same. I'm just saying, Melissa said quietly. They said the same thing before that girl died. The air thickened between them. Behind them, a radio crackled with the sound of a technician reporting filtration pressure levels. Somewhere nearby, water slammed against acrylic. Maris exhaled and pulled her wetsuit back over her shoulder. He knows me. We're locked in. It's not the same. Melissa didn't argue. She just shook her head once and walked away, her boots tapping wetly down the corridor. That afternoon, the trainers gathered for a second practice in Tank C. The show had been restructured for an updated routine. Neptune was scheduled to perform a mid-air twist through a floating hoop. A harmless-looking orange buoy was set in the center of the tank, tethered loosely for his approach. As the music cued and Maris gave her first hand signal, Neptune swam to position. But just before the hoop cue, he paused, then suddenly surged forward, not at the hoop, but at the buoy itself. He lunged with violent intent, jaws wide, crashing into it and tearing it in half with a single snap. Water exploded across the deck. Trainers recoiled. A clipboard fell. One of the newer assistants stepped back too quickly and slipped, landing hard against the guardrail. Maris stood still, dripping, watching the shredded foam bob to the surface. The sound of cracking rubber still rang in her ears. Neptune floated nearby, breathing slow. His dorsal fin broke the surface like a knife. Jesus, someone muttered. Maris turned away, jaw tight. She motioned for the music to stop and waved off the rest of the routine. No one protested. Everyone had seen it. An hour later, she found herself staring at the log sheet again in the operations room. Neptune's behavior line was full of crossed-out notes. Disruption during feeding, ignored retrieval cue, tail slap near glass. Each event was downplayed in the margin. Resolved, not repeated, trainer handled. She wanted to write something, anything. Instead, she capped the pen. The last rehearsal before the evening show was brief. As Maris entered the water, Neptune approached from the far end. His body glided like a phantom beneath the blue. She gave the signal for spin. 2 fingers twirled mid-air. He didn't move. Then his eyes surfaced. It locked with hers. Not blank, not trusting, but watching. She hesitated. He dove. And she realized, too late, he wasn't following her anymore. The archive room at Blue Horizon Oceanic Park was tucked away behind a rarely used corridor, sandwiched between the vet lab and the equipment cage. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, casting a faint green tint over the filing cabinets and yellowing safety charts. Maris stood alone in the dim light, the projector humming beside her, flicking grainy footage onto the white wall. The clip was time-stamped from 6 months earlier, a late-night training session with Neptune in the secondary tank. On screen, the Orca paced the perimeter, his tail flicking faster with each pass. A trainer young, unfamiliar, stood at the edge giving simple cues. Without warning, Neptune spun mid-water and slammed his full weight into the acrylic wall. The trainer slipped backward, disappearing out of frame. The footage cut there. No audio, no follow-up. Maris stepped back from the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't remember seeing this on any official incident report. She rewound, watched the impact again. The force was undeniable, and the aggression deliberate. Behind her, a metal drawer creaked open. Melissa entered, holding a paper folder marked Incident Notes, Internal. She handed it to Maris without a word. They buried it, Melissa said. Said it was a fluke. I filed a formal report twice. Legal flagged it as damaging to public trust. They scrubbed the record. Maris flipped through the pages, photos, statements. One section noted a trainee with a sprained wrist and mild concussion. It had been signed off and sealed within 2 days. "I didn't know," Maris whispered. "You weren't here yet," Melissa replied. "They brought you in right after." Back in the locker room, Maris sat on the wooden bench, staring into the open compartment where her neatly folded wetsuit rested. A red-flagged email blinked at her from the top corner of the mounted screen. Subject concerning patterns. Please review. Date 2 months after she started. She had never opened it. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the park's concrete walls, casting long shadows across the platform. The air turned heavier, the scent of salt and damp metal clinging to every breath. That evening, the final promo shoot was scheduled. Management wanted a clean pass, no distractions, no mistakes. The film crew set up at the edge of the performance tank, assembling cranes, lenses, and reflectors. Drones buzzed overhead. The creative director barked cues through a megaphone, his voice echoing across the water. Maris suited up in silence. Her face was tight, unreadable, as she approached the tank. Neptune surfaced near the far end, only his dorsal fin visible above the deepening green water. The lights had been adjusted for a golden hour effect, warm and dreamy, meant to evoke wonder. The set designer handed her a waterproof mic, but she waved it off. "We won't need sound," she said. As she stepped onto the platform, the camera zoomed in. Neptune swam closer, his movements smooth but slower than usual. She tossed him a fish, hand brushing briefly against the long scar near his pectoral fin. She had touched that spot hundreds of times. This time, it felt like something under glass cold, unyielding. He circled her in the shallows, his body brushing against the edge of her thigh with deliberate contact. The camera tracked their motion like choreography. But Maris wasn't smiling. The bleachers were empty, yet the air held tension like a crowd holding its breath. Each light flickered slightly in the rising breeze. Somewhere behind her, one of the production assistants adjusted a reflector, its metallic flap catching a sharp glint from the last of the sun. Neptune slowed his circle, then stopped. He turned his head not to her, but toward the lens. The cameraman, focused on his monitor, froze. "Hey, he's looking straight at us." Maris glanced over her shoulder. Neptune was motionless, staring. His eye didn't blink, just still, empty, too calm. By 3:45 p.m., every seat in the Blue Horizon Amphitheater was full. A soft hum of conversation settled over the bleachers as families fanned themselves beneath the overhead canopy. The smell of sunscreen, buttered pretzels, and salt water filled the air. Below, the surface of the main tank gleamed under the late afternoon light, calm, unbroken, reflecting a perfect dome of blue sky. Maris Ellington stood at the side platform, her earpiece crackling softly with stage cues from the tech booth. She rolled her shoulders, checking the tightness of her dive belt with a practiced flick of her hand. Her heart pounded steady, but alert. The sun struck the glass tank, casting slow-moving light patterns across her wetsuit as she waited for her signal. Behind her, the announcer's voice rose over the speakers, cheerful and confident. "And now, the moment you've all been waiting for." A sudden spray of water broke the silence. Neptune surfaced, his dorsal fin slicing upward like a blade. The crowd roared. A group of children in the front row jumped to their feet, arms waving. The music swelled strings, horns, perfectly timed. Maris stepped forward, counted 3 beats, then dove. The water closed over her in a burst of silver bubbles. She emerged at the center of the tank just as Neptune curved around her. They moved as one loops, rolls, synchronized turns. It was the signature routine, the one printed on every park brochure. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed like thunder. It was working. Her final cue came a subtle twist of the wrist, the signal for Neptune's grand breach. He was meant to rise beside her in a spectacular arc, water flying in all directions, ending the show with a flourish. But he didn't. Instead, Neptune sank. It was too sudden, too sharp. Maris turned in the water, confused. Her mouth formed a word, his name, but before sound could follow, a violent surge exploded beneath her. Neptune launched upward, not beside her, but directly at her. His jaws opened wide, clamping around her torso with a force that split the water like a grenade. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath sliced by one scream, then another. Maris's arms flailed once above the surface, then disappeared. From the platform, two trainers bolted into action. One shouted into a walkie, the other grabbed the emergency fish bucket, hurling a scatter of mackerel into the tank. A third tossed a buoy bright orange, desperately trying to break Neptune's focus. But he didn't break. He dove with her in his mouth, then rose again, slamming her limp form against the wall of the tank. The impact echoed through the stadium, wet, blunt, unmistakable. A cloud of red unfurled beneath them. Children screamed. Parents scrambled. One mother shielded her son's face with both hands as he tried to look. A man dropped his phone and didn't pick it up. The emergency alarm shrieked to life, a wailing, high-pitched siren meant only for the unthinkable. Security rushed down the stadium steps. The tech booth went dark. Staff poured out of the side wings, waving for the crowd to exit. In the tank, Neptune held Maris for another second, then released her. She floated face down, the water stilled. For a brief, impossible moment, Neptune turned his head toward the audience. His eye was visible above the surface, wide, still, cold. He stared, unblinking, and in that stare, there was no sign of recognition. Not of the woman he had swum beside for 2 years. Not of the hundreds of faces now running for the exits. Just something ancient, something final. The amphitheater was nearly deserted by the time the last scream faded. What remained was stillness heavy, surreal. The crowd had been ushered out in waves by security, their footsteps echoing off the concrete stairwells. Popcorn buckets were overturned along the aisles. A stroller sat abandoned near the splash zone, one wheel slowly spinning. The emergency siren had stopped, but the faint metallic echo of it still haunted the air. Rescue divers in black dry suits stood at the edge of the tank, heads bowed briefly before plunging in. Spotlights flickered on overhead, casting a sterile white across the water. The music had long since cut off, and in its place came the low hum of water pumps and the muffled churn of Neptune's movement beneath the surface. 40 seconds passed, then her body surfaced, face down, limbs slack, her wetsuit torn clean across the chest, exposing a deep bruise running diagonally along her ribs. One of the divers cradled her head as they lifted her toward the deck. Blood threaded through the water, dissipating into long red ribbons. The moment her body touched the platform, medics swarmed. Hands moved in desperate rhythm compressions. Breath, more compressions. A trainer began crying behind her fist. No pulse, no movement, just the faint slap of water against the tank wall and the sharp, sickly mix of salt and blood and something metallic like iron and chlorine. They worked on her for 11 minutes, then they stopped. Time of death. 16 p.m. No one spoke. Melissa Nguyen stood off to the side, her arms wrapped around herself. Her radio earpiece dangled, silent. She had known it would come to this, not exactly how, but eventually, they all did. But when it happened, when it really happened, nothing in the world felt heavy enough to hold it. Later that night, the trainer wing was silent except for the occasional hiss of steam from the industrial dryers. Melissa sat at the desk in the office, the light of the monitor glowing against her tired face. Her inbox was open. One email was marked unread. She didn't recognize the sender's name, but the subject froze her breath in her chest. Regarding Neptune. Staff concern. Internal use only. She clicked it. Inside was a forwarded thread dated 3 months earlier. The original sender was a former technician from the behavioral monitoring team. The attachments included a video file labeled July Incident, Move, and a scanned PDF of a formal report submitted to upper management. Melissa opened the document. Her own words stared back at her. Trainer behavior indicates high-risk dependency on animal cooperation, recommending suspension of water-based routines until further review, pattern of non-compliance observed. The final line had been stamped over in bold red font, concern not actionable, risk manageable if handled with experience. She opened the video next. Grainy footage from a staff-only night session showed Neptune refusing a recall cue 3 times in a row. On the 4th attempt, he lashed his tail against the platform. Trainers had laughed it off. Melissa closed the laptop slowly. Her palms were slick. At 2:14 a.m., the official statement went live on the park's website. Blue Horizon Oceanic Park has suspended all Orca performances pending the outcome of a full internal investigation. No name was mentioned, no apology, no ownership, just protocol. Back in the locker room, Maris's wetsuit still hung on the hook. The scent of it, rubber, sweat, ocean lingered. Her locker door was ajar. Inside, a Polaroid of her and Neptune taken last spring still sat tucked into the corner mirror. She was laughing in the picture. Wet hair, mask pushed up on her forehead. He was beside her, just behind the glass, in the tank. Neptune continued to swim slow, deliberate circles. His body broke the surface every 20 seconds or so, blowing sharp exhales before disappearing into the blue again. From above, it almost looked normal. If you hadn't seen what came before, Melissa stood in the shadows of the doorway, watching him. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke, half whisper, half confession. This wasn't the first time. She swallowed, but it might be the last. By dawn. The sky over Blue Horizon Oceanic Park was choked with chopper blades and news station banners flapping in the coastal wind. Reporters lined the outer fence, cords and tripods snaking across the sidewalk. The security team, pale and bleary-eyed, stood with crossed arms at the main gate as vans from every local and national outlet jockeyed for position in the lot. Cameras were already rolling when the park's first official statement hit the airwaves. Tragic incident during routine Orca show. Our hearts go out to the family of Maris Ellington. An internal review is underway. But within minutes, the narrative fractured. Commentators across networks asked the same question: was this preventable? On one channel, a former SeaWorld trainer suggested it had been human error, a lapse in judgment under pressure. On another, an animal welfare attorney held up a printed email from a whistleblower dated weeks before the attack. The word ignored was underlined in red ink. Outside the entrance, protesters began to gather. Signs reading "Captivity Kills" and "Free Neptune" rose above the hedges that once led tourists into the Splash Zone gift shop. A young woman in a faded Orcas Are People Too t-shirt held up a laminated photo of Maris, taped beside a candle. The hashtag #JaSajar Justice for Maurice began trending nationally by noon. At the trainer wing, Melissa Nguyen sat behind locked doors, answering call after call from investigators and journalists. Her inbox was flooded with interview requests, her voicemail box full. She hadn't left the park since the attack. Her phone buzzed again. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Check Reddit. Someone leaked the transport footage. Melissa opened the link. The grainy clip was unmistakable. Neptune inside a steel transport crate, thrashing. He slammed the sides over and over, his massive frame jolting the camera with each hit. Trainers could be heard off-screen laughing nervously. He hates these things, one said. The footage had never been made public. Melissa remembered the day. It had been rushed, tight deadlines, no behavioral prep, and she'd said nothing. A former park executive appeared on a podcast that evening. His voice was calm, practiced. Look, we knew he was getting worse. You pull the star of 6 shows a week. You lose ticket revenue, donor confidence, season pass renewals. There's a reason he stayed in rotation. Doesn't mean it was the right one. In a sterile press room lit by buzzing fluorescents. Blue Horizon's CEO stood behind a branded podium flanked by legal counsel. She wore a calm expression, her words memorized. This was an isolated tragedy. Our park has maintained the highest safety standards. We are reviewing all procedures. But Melissa had read the incident log. She had seen the footage, and she knew what the trainers whispered when the cameras weren't around. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't new. In a televised interview the next morning, Dr. Karen Hallen, a marine behaviorist with 2 decades of field experience, spoke directly to the camera. Orcas don't lose their minds. They don't snap like rabid dogs. They suppress, they survive, and eventually they break. The clip went viral, shared, stitched, reposted. A story was forming not just about a trainer and a whale, but about a system. That night, outside the park's shuttered gates, someone spray-painted a question across the outer wall in clean black letters. How many more? 3 months had passed since the crowd screamed and the water turned red, since the headlines, since the blame, since the silence that followed. Blue Horizon Oceanic Park had not reopened its Orca arena. The amphitheater, once a jewel of San Diego tourism, now sat lifeless beneath the same California sun that once shimmered off Neptune's back. The benches, bleached slightly from years of use, stood in silent rows facing an empty tank. The surface of the water was perfectly still, undisturbed by dorsal fins or applause. A laminated sign hung crooked on the locked chain-link gate. No entry. Area decommissioned. Inside, the control booth's monitors were powered off. The stage lights had been dismantled, their heavy trusses removed one by one and stored in the old maintenance hangar. The performance tank no longer echoed with music or scripted cheer, just the low hum of the filtration system, cycling water that no longer had a reason to move. Melissa Nguyen walked alone along the upper aisle of the stadium. She carried a single white lily in her hand, the stem wrapped in a paper towel. Her footsteps tapped softly on the concrete, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. She stopped near the edge of the tank, where the platform once extended out for trainers to dive from. It had been stripped bare, no speakers, no spotlights, no diving belts, just space. She knelt slowly and placed the flower on the cool tile. The water lapped gently below, barely perceptible. Maris Ellington's locker had never been cleared. Her wetsuit still hung inside. The silver trim faded slightly from sun and time. Above it, taped to the metal, was a printed note in her handwriting, "Trust is earned, not demanded." It was underlined in blue ink. Melissa had read it 100 times. She read it again. Neptune had been relocated in the second week after the incident. Quietly, no press, no fanfare, no ceremony. The park arranged the transfer with a private marine sanctuary off the coast of British Columbia. There, they said, he would live in a protected coastal inlet, no performances, no crowds, no barriers, but the sea itself. It wasn't freedom, not fully, but it was something closer. Some staff said he cried out during transport. Others said he was silent the entire time. The trainer wing had changed, too. The corkboard where shifts were once posted now held legal notices and new safety protocols. The coffee machine was removed. Too many bad memories lived in its smell. In the weeks that followed Maris's death, 3 more employees resigned. One moved to Oregon, another to a research vessel in Alaska. Melissa stayed. She felt like she had to. The lawsuits dragged on. Settlements were reached. Some figures were disclosed, others weren't. One morning, a package arrived in the mailroom, no return address. Inside was a copy of the internal report marked "Confidential," now redacted in black ink across entire pages. It had been shredded, then taped back together. Whoever sent it had wanted the damage to show. And still, there was the tank. The water, though chemically treated, still smelled faintly of something organic, like algae, like memory. Melissa closed her eyes and listened. No music, no announcer's voice, just the rhythmic pulse of the filtration unit groaning to life an old sound, one she used to ignore. Now, it reminded her of a heartbeat that refused to stop. She opened her eyes and whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We kept telling ourselves they were happy. There had been a time when Maris believed that. Maybe Melissa had too. A gentle breeze rolled in from the ocean, stirring the laminated sign slightly on its hook. A loose corner fluttered against the fence. Wild animals are not pets. They are not toys, and they will never forget what they are. Melissa stood and walked away, leaving the flower behind. And the tank waited. The sun had already dipped behind the bleachers when the last hose was turned off. The concrete was stained in places they didn't scrub. Her dive belt, torn and silent, still lay beside the platform. No one had touched it. The locker with her name stayed shut, but someone had slid a folded towel through the vent. The tank lights clicked on automatically, casting that same pale blue glow across water that now held no audience. Melissa stood alone, fingers trailing the rail, eyes locked on the place Neptune had last surfaced. There was no sound but the hum of machines and distant gulls. Some stories don't end with justice. They just stop, unfinished. And when silence is all that's left, who do you blame it on if this moment still lingers with you? Share it so it's not forgotten.